Hashem Yechud Kutsh Abrichu Shrinter. We start this majestic and unique evening with the recitation of Psalm 131. Shir HaMa'alot LeDavid. Adonai lo gava libi velo ramu enai. ולא הילכתי בגדולות ובנפלאות ממני, אם לא שיוויתי ודוממתי נפשי. כגמול עלי אמו, כגמול עלי נפשי. יחל ישראל אל אדוני, מעתה ועד עולם. A psalm for the ascent by King David. Almighty God, let our hearts not be elevated, nor our eyes heightened. Let us walk not in ways more formidable and wondrous than ours, lest we first practice soulful equanimity and spiritual quietude. May the Jewish people long for God Almighty from now to eternity. Amen. Birshut Shamayim, with permission from on high. Birshut Harav, with permission of our monumental rabbi. Birshut Harabanim, with the permission of all rabbis present here. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for attending. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're in the presence of greatness, the leading Jewish mind of our time, and one of the foremost public intellectuals in the world entire, reflecting not only about the Jewish condition, but the human condition writ large. A person who was introduced at Yale University as one of the prime spiritual figures of our time, together with the Dalai Lama and the Pope. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks' encyclopedic knowledge in Torah, in Jewish spirituality, and in secular and worldly wisdom is unrivaled and incomparable. His contribution to Jewish and human thought in our days, in our time, in our historical epoch, can be summarized, I believe, in two words in the English language: indispensable and incalculable. To truly understand and internalize the rabbi's contribution to Jewish thought and to human thought today, one needs to revert to a concept and a phrase articulated by Rabbi Lord Sacks himself, namely that the meaning of the system lies outside the system. Rabbi Sacks' grandeur of spirit supersedes his overt, formal, academic, external achievements on the revealed level, what the Kabbalah calls Alma Deit Galia, his innumerable degrees and books and honorary prizes. Rabbi Sacks, to quote a contemporary British academic, is transforming the epistemology of theology in our time, which means in simpler English that Rabbi Sacks is revolutionizing the way we think religion. And he's also an excelling disciple of his rabbi, the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, who gave him his life's vocation to kindle Jewish souls on fire. In the words of Rashi, Ad sheta'aleh shalhevet me'eleh, until the soul of each and every Jew, the world entire, is inflamed with godliness for perpetuity. With his majestic weekly Torah commentaries, Rabbi Lord Professor Jonathan Sacks spiritually nourishes the inner fountains of countless Jews and non-Jews alike. People speak today with great philosophical and theological longings about the late Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal and Abram Joshua Heschel. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks undoubtedly is the contemporary equivalent of those masters and giants. And so, befittingly, beloved friends, I'm going to ask you all to kindly rise and recite a bracha that I would venture to postulate most of us never recited before. We will recite it first in Hebrew, and then we will explain it in English. Please reiterate with me. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Shechalak Michochmato Leire'av, which means the following: Blessed are you, Hashem, King of the universe, who imparted a measure of his infinite wisdom upon those who verily revere him, upon the mere mortal flesh and blood. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving an otherworldly welcome to an exemplary human being and to the spiritual and existential mentor of an entire generation of Jews and non-Jews alike, Kvod Harav Yaakov Tzvi, the Honorable Rabbi Lord Jonathan Henry Sacks Shlita.
Wow. What a welcome. And it makes me feel two things. Number one, very humbled. And number two, maybe I ought to stay in LA. But what a joy it is to be here. I must tell you, coming from Britain, you may have noticed, I don't know whether the news reached you here in LA, that our royal family has been having a little mishpachology, a little. So it's a joy to be able to leave behind the problems of one royal family and join the celebrations of another royal family, namely the members of Tiferet Israel. You really are a royal family. If we say Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, is the King, that makes every one of us, every single one of us, princes and princesses. And you have done one thing which has proved challenging to other royal families, namely, you have been able to keep the family together. Because your community, as your president has mentioned, comes from so many different places of origin with so many different Jewish histories, from Israel, from Turkey, from Rhodes, Greece, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Cuba, and even the USA. And you have taken them and made of all of you one family. And that is very, very beautiful. You have maintained with great faithfulness and pride your Sephardi traditions and customs. And I have to confess, I am not a Sephardi. I hope this doesn't shock you. But I admire the Sephardi loyalty to tradition so much because you have a unique blend. And this is the great distinction of the Sephardim, of clear mind, warm heart, and unshakable soul. And to find all of those together is really, really special. So I have, over the last few years, been accustomed to say, Yasher Chayli, if I had the power to do so, I would convert all Ashkenazim to become Sephardi. But the fact is that you have a combination of a truly outstanding community, a beautiful shul, and a really, really special rabbi, Rabbi Tal Sessler. An extraordinary combination of real neshama, of real soul, and great intellect. I have to tell you, having conversed with him over the course of today, I have to tell you he knows my books much better than I do. But then, when it comes to my books, I only write them, I never read them. But I bless him, Kvod Harav, and the Rabbanit, Dr. Nina, and your young Eliana and Noah. May they grow to be a pride to Am Yisrael, and we thank you, Rabbi Sessler, for all you've done for the community. I want to thank also, of course, your Chazan, Chaim Mizrahi, who has served this community so well and so beautifully for all these years. You as a community have a proud past, a great future, and as you celebrate this momentous centenary, we thank Hashem, She'echiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Amen. Friends, you've asked me to speak about the challenges facing the Jewish people in the 21st century. And it's very interesting how we perceive challenges. There is one nation almost as old as we are, the Chinese, who have this. China has been around for a long time. I had the privilege when I was chief rabbi in Britain of also visiting every year the Jewish community in Hong Kong, Ohel Leah. And so I was there when Chris Patten, the British Governor General, retired. Britain had to give back Hong Kong to the Chinese. I don't think I would have done so, but, you know, Brits are Brits. And so I had the privilege always, I used to meet with the acting head of state wherever I went for the first time. I had the privilege of meeting the first Beijing-appointed governor of Hong Kong, Mr. Tung Chee-hwa. He was a lovely man, very, very philo-Semitic, very pro-Israel. And he said to me, you Jews and we Chinese have been around a long time. He said, we've been around 5,000 years, and by my reading, you've been around 6,000 years. He said, what I wanted to know was, what did you do for the first 1,000 years before you had kosher Chinese takeaways? I said, you want to know what the Jewish people did for those 1,000 years before they had kosher Chinese takeaways? They complained about the food. But if I ask what allowed China to survive for so long, its civilization for so long, it is the famous fact that the Chinese ideogram for crisis also means opportunity. If you see any crisis as also an opportunity, you have resilience. There is only one language I know that goes one better, and that is Hebrew. Because the Hebrew word for crisis is mashber. But mashber also means a birthing stool. So every crisis in Hebrew is chevlei leda. Something new is being born. So we don't only see crisis as opportunity, we see crisis as a spur to creativity, to something new. And so it was in every crisis in Jewish history. The destruction of the first temple and the Babylonian exile led to the renewal of whom Ezra and Nehemiah are the great exemplars of Torah in the life of Jews. The destruction of the second temple by the Romans led to the writing down of the incredible literature of Torah Shebal Peh, the oral law, Midrash, Mishnah, Gemara. The encounter with Christianity in the Middle Ages led to the birth of Jewish biblical commentary in reply to the way the Christians were reading the Bible. The encounter with Islam led to the birth of Jewish philosophy. That is who the Rambam was in dialogue with. The Crusades led to the Hasidei Ashkenaz. The Spanish expulsion led to the mystics in Safat, who wrote those beautiful poems that we ring, Yedid Nefesh, Lecha Dodi. The greatest tragedy of all to hit our people in 2,000 years, the Holocaust, led directly to the founding of Medinat Yisrael, the greatest affirmation of life in 2,000 years of Jewish history. We don't just survive crises, we grow and become stronger through them. And that is how it should be with all the three crises that I'm going to speak about this evening. Number one, anti-Semitism. Number two, Jewish identity and our loss of many young Jews. And number three, the fraught relationship, not here, but elsewhere in American Jewry, between some American Jews and the State of Israel. And I want to talk about those three today, and every one of them seems to me to be an opportunity, not just a crisis. Number one, anti-Semitism. This could not sadly be more timely. World leaders are just gathering. Monsieur Macron arrived in Jerusalem today. Leaders from 47 different countries are gathering in Yerushalayim to observe the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. They will all be there in Yad Vashem, among them your Vice President, Mike Pence, and our Prince Charles, who will deliver a very, very strong personal speech about how the Holocaust and Holocaust survivors have had an impact on his life. But you have had now a horrendous rise of anti-Semitism in this place that we expected at least. Here in Los Angeles, am I right, you've had swastika daubings, including a shul and a school. You've had the terrible tragedies elsewhere of Pittsburgh and Poway and Jersey City and Monsey. In Britain, we had a leader of the Labour Party, one of our two big parties, who made that party a safe haven for anti-Semites and anti-Zionists. Of course, I have to say, in deference to the leader of the Labour Party, he performed a miracle. He united Jews. I have never seen our community so united. It was amazing. Orthodox, Reform, secular, they all turned up, they all spoke up overnight. You know, it was a complete new face of Anglo Jewry. It brought out our Jewishness in a way nothing else had done. Until then, you know, in Anglo Jewry, we'd been very profil namuch. We didn't want to, as the English say, upset the horses. You know, you keep a very, very low profile. Suddenly, we as a philosopher, you have a philosopher rabbi here. You need a PhD for this joke, but a philosopher once said that the Anglo-Jewish identity was incognito ergo sum. You know, you just don't tell anyone you're Jewish, basically. So the return of anti-Semitism to the world has happened within living memory of the Holocaust. After more than half a century of Holocaust education, more than half a century of interfaith dialogue, more than half a century of anti-racist legislation, this is shocking. It is deeply shocking. It is a stain on humanity. Why has it happened? Obviously, anti-Semitism is a very complex phenomenon, and I don't want to simplify it. But if I must, the answer is that the world is changing faster than people can bear. And the digital revolution is creating turbulence, the like of which the world hasn't seen since the invention of printing in the 15th century. And everything is suddenly changed. Now, when the world is changing, there are two possible roads you can go down. One road says, what shall we do? That is the good road. But the bad road says, who did this to us? And that is the road some people take. And when that happens, three things happen. Number one, when you say, who did this to us, you define yourself as a victim. And that's a bad place to be. Number two, you then are forced to search for a scapegoat whom you identify as the perpetrator, the victimizer. And number three, over history, the scapegoat of choice has been the Jews. Why? Because for 1,000 years, they were the most prominent non-Christian minority in a Christian Europe. And today the State of Israel is the most obvious and prominent non-Muslim presence in a Muslim Middle East. We are the people who get singled out. Now, there is no logic to anti-Semitism. You can't deal with it logically. It's a bundle of contradictions. Jews have been hated because they were rich, and because they were poor, because they were capitalists, because they were communists, because they kept to themselves, and because they infiltrated everywhere. Voltaire hated Jews because he held that they believed in an ancient superstitious faith. Stalin hated Jews because they were rootless cosmopolitans who believed in nothing. So how do you explain a phenomenon that is fraught all the way through with contradiction? The only way I could do it, and I did this some 20 years ago, is to compare it to a virus. It's a virus. That's what it is. It affects people sometimes without understanding what is happening to them. And the human body has the most incredible defense against viruses called the immune system. Now, how do viruses survive the immune system? The answer is they mutate, so that the immune system doesn't recognize them. And that is what has happened to anti-Semitism. Every time a very effective defense against it has been created, an immune system, as was created after the Holocaust, the virus mutates. So we are living through the third mutation. In the Middle Ages, Jews were hated for their religion. In the 19th and 20th centuries, they were hated for their race. Today, they are hated for their nation state. Anti-Zionism is one form of the new anti-Semitism. Now, I have said this many, many times, and I get challenged on this. I got challenged on BBC television news on this. Rabbi Sachs, aren't you saying that all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism? I said to the interviewer, actually a week ago, I was in a school with 16-year-old kids, and they asked me the same question. So I said to the kids in the school, hands up all those who believe it is legitimate to criticize Britain. Everyone put their hands up. I said, how many of you believe Britain has no right to exist? Nobody put their hands up. So I said to the television interviewer, if 16-year-old school children can understand the difference, so can you. So anti-Semitism has returned. I realized this in 2001. I grew up with non-Jewish friends, went to a non-Jewish university, spent my life among non-Jews, and I never once experienced anti-Semitism, not a single time. In 2001, our youngest daughter, who was then studying at the London School of Economics, went to an anti-globalization rally, which turned quickly into a tirade against America, then to a diatribe against Israel, and finally to an assault on Jews. She came back that night with tears in her eyes and said, "Dad, they hate us." Now, our children, she is one of the strongest people I know. And to see her, 21 years old, with tears in her eyes, I thought, this I did not expect to see in the 21st century. Now, it is important for us to realize that this is not Germany or Europe in the 1930s. It really isn't. We have to make a clear distinction. In July 1938, representatives of 32 countries gathered in the French spa town of Evian, knowing that something horrendous was going to happen to the Jews. Hitler had already used the word Vernichtung, extermination. And so they knew what was happening. Those 32 nations, every single one of them, decided not to open its doors to Jews. And at that point in history, Jews knew there was not 1 square foot on earth that they could call home in the sense given by the poet Robert Frost when he said, home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to let you in. Jews had no home. Today, Baruch Hashem, we have a home. We have the state of Israel, which is a home to every single one of us. And incidentally, that is why we must support the state of Israel against all its enemies. But this means that we have to face anti-Semitism without fear. And what do we have to do? 3 things. Number 1, this occurred to me in 2003 when we organized, as a conference of European rabbis, for Romano Prodi, the then head of the European Union, to convene a conference on anti-Semitism in the EU headquarters in Brussels. There were 1,000 people in the chamber. And as I looked around, to my horror, I saw that around 950 of them were Jews. And I thought, this is not going to cure anti-Semitism. And I got up, and these are the words with which I began my speech. Jews cannot fight anti-Semitism alone. The victim cannot cure the crime. The hated cannot cure the hate. I fight for the right of Christians everywhere in the world to live their faith without fear. But I need you Christians to fight for the right of Jews to live without fear. I said, I lead the fight in Britain against Islamophobia, but I need you Muslims to lead the fight against Judeophobia. And so we decided then and there that in Britain at least, the fight against anti-Semitism would be led by non-Jews. And it has been. It has been led by all the prime ministers since then, by Tony Blair, by Gordon Brown, David Cameron, by Theresa May, and indeed by Boris Johnson. They have all been they have led the fight. It's been led by non-Jewish members of parliament, some of whom resigned their membership of the Labour Party because of this. It has been led by leaders of other faiths, including the Archbishop of Canterbury and leaders of the Sikh and Hindu communities, and by moderate Muslims. It has been led by John le Carré, J.K. Rowling, and other iconic figures like that in the world of arts and literature. And I want to tell you something. You may not have read about this, but as our community was really fraught by this recent election and thinking that there's a possibility that an anti-Semite, or at least a close friend of anti-Semites, might win the election. And our community was, I've never seen it so anxious. And at the height of that anxiety, just before the election, Prince Charles held a reception for 400 members of the Jewish community in Buckingham Palace and stood up and said, no community has contributed more to Britain than the Jewish community. Here, your president has taken a clear and strong stand against anti-Semitism. And I believe his recent executive order will assist the fight against BDS and the intimidation of Jewish students on campus. It is very, very important that non-Jews lead. It's important that we remember we have enemies, yes, but we also have friends, good and special friends, and we should take the time to make more because they could not be more important to us. So that's number one. Number two is security. I can see you really had it here tonight. This is most impressive. Thank you for that. Security is important because people who seek to harm Jews always search out soft targets. And we have to make sure that no Jewish shul, school, premises, none of them is a soft target. You will need a lot of major activity on the part of the community and financial help from the government to have things like security doors, blast-proof windows, security guards, and so on. Our Jewish community has been doing this for a very, very long time. And it has helped us so far, Baruch Hashem, avoid any really major physical attack on Jews. And we have something called the Community Security Trust, which has about 60 professionals, experts, monitoring all potential threats to the community. It works hand in hand with the government and the police force. And then we have 4,000 volunteers standing as voluntary security shlichim on all our premises. I have to tell you, it is wonderful. And it does some unusual and unexpected things. I hope I don't shock you if I tell you that not every single young Jew wants to spend their time inside a synagogue. So what did CST do? It took standing outside a synagogue and turned it into a mitzvah. Now, when you're standing security for a long time and there's nothing much happening and you've got a young man and a young woman standing security duty, they get talking to one another, and our security volunteers turned out to be the best shidduch agency we've ever had. So do the security, and that's important. And finally, never let anti-Semitism make us afraid. I once tell the story of a very, very Orthodox Haredi rabbi who in the end of the 1980s went to Moscow as Glasnost and Perestroika was happening. It was opening up life to Jews. The only trouble was this easing of communist rule opened the door not only for Jews but also for anti-Semites. And a young Jewish woman came to see this rabbi in a state of shock and concern, and she said, you know, all my life, nobody ever commented on my Jewishness, and now when I walk in the street, they shout at me, Jid, Jid. And the rabbi turned to the young lady and said, well, look at the way I'm dressed. He was wearing a kapota and a shtreimel. He said, they probably don't take me for an Episcopalian. He said, and yet no one has shouted, Jid, Jid at me. Why do you think that is? And she said, you know why? Because they know I will take it as an insult, but you will take it as a compliment. Now, there is a very deep lesson there. Wear your identity with pride. That's probably the best thing we can do to let anti-Semites know they cannot win. So just remember, every civilization that ever sought to destroy Jews, whether it was Egypt or Assyria or Babylon or Greece or Rome or the medieval empires of Christianity or Islam, all the way to the Third Reich and the Soviet Union, every one of those superpowers that bestrode the narrow world as a colossus has been consigned to history, and we, this tiny, vulnerable people, can still stand and sing, Am Yisrael Chai. We win the battle. Now look, number two, that is anti-Semitism. Number two, disaffiliation. We know, and the Sephardim here are exceptional in not facing this challenge quite as much as the Ashkenazim are, but there is a major challenge to Jewish identity here in the diaspora. Today in America, when young Jews are asked, what religion are you? 30% say none. Throughout the Jewish world, between 2 in 3 and 3 in 4 of young Jews is deciding not to marry another Jew, have Jewish children, and continue the Jewish story. It's a real, real tragedy. The late Shlomo Carlebach he spent his life going around campuses, and he once said, I ask, because he always included non-Jews in his concert as well, and he always used to say, when I ask people, what are you? And somebody said, Catholic? I said, I knew that's a Catholic. Protestant, I knew that's a Protestant. I'm just a human being, I know that's a Jew. And it really is a tragedy. And how do we approach this? Number one, just to remember the story of our people. My late great-grandfather, Alav Shalom, was a historian who, among other things, traced the family history. So we have a family tree which goes back to the Maharal of Prague, which goes back to Rashi, which goes back to Yehuda HaNasi, which goes back to David HaMelech, which goes back to Yehuda, which goes back to Yaakov and Yitzchak, etc., etc. And I showed this family tree to our children once when they were young, and one of my daughters turned to me and said, "Hey, Dad, we're descended from Abraham and Sarah. We're famous." And I had to tell her every single Jew has a family tree like that. We're all royalty. Do we really want a story that's lasted for 4,000 years to end with us? How can we do such a thing? That's number one, just to be given a sense of where we come from, the gift of an identity and a history, the like of which no other people has had. But number two, looking to the future. You know, there was a lady from San Francisco who got in touch with me and said, "Rabbi Sachs, you know, you've been talking about the social media and smartphones, and we're here in Silicon Valley, and I must tell you, our kids spend all their time on their smartphones and their Facebook, Instagram, and it's terrible. It's terrible for their social skills. It's terrible for their eye contact. It's terrible even when we're having meals. They're holding their phone under the table and texting their friends." She said, "So we decided as a family, we talked it through and we decided we are going to have as a family 1 day a week a screen-free day. No phones, no tablets, no laptops." She said, "You'll love what we're calling it. We're going to call it Shabbos." I can't tell you how important Shabbat is. And sometimes I think non-Jews appreciate this even better than we do. You know, I spent a week, Elena and my wife and I spent a week in Amritsar, which is the Jerusalem of the Sikhs, where the Golden Temple is. We spent it with the Sikhs, with the Hindus, with the Dalai Lama. We spent a week. And I'm standing, Dalai Lama and I spoke to the 2,000 students at the Sikh University, and I couldn't believe it that one of the leaders of the Sikh community worldwide, Babaji, I've forgotten his full name, Mahinder Singh, got up in front of 2,000 Sikh students in Amritsar and said, "We Sikhs need what the Jews have. They call it Shabbos." He said, "Can you imagine 1 day in 7 when you don't do any work and you just spend time with the family and with friends? We need Shabbos." I said to him, "Babaji, could you come and give that sermon in one of our shuls, please?" 2010, there was a conference on climate change in Copenhagen, United Nations. And the Secretary of State for the Environment asked the Archbishop of Canterbury and myself to bring together religious leaders before that conference to tell him what our religious traditions are on caring for God's earth. And so I said, "Well, look, you know, I have one simple solution to solve climate change. Keep Shabbos. Because no cars, no planes, no anything. You cut down the carbon footprint by a seventh, it'll cure global warming." And Imam came up to me and said, "You know, I never looked at it that way. I'm going to tell my congregation not to drive to the mosque on Friday." I said, "Imam, come and tell that sermon in one of our shuls, please." 2 years ago, the Archbishop of York, the number 2 in the hierarchy of the Anglican Communion worldwide, spent Shabbos with us in Marble Arch Synagogue, 25 hours, from Kabbalat Shabbat to Havdalah. He davened with us, he sang with us, he ate with us, he learned with us. His name is John Santamo. I said, "John, why are you doing this?" He said, "Because one of the greatest gifts of you Jews to us Christians is the Sabbath. And we are losing it, and you are keeping it. So I want to come and see how you are keeping it." It is a wonderful, wonderful gift that that is the antidote to the pressures of a 24/7 world, the horrific effects of too much exposure to the social media, and so on have. Shabbat was made for the 21st century. Number 3, I don't know if any religion ever has valued the individual more. Nefesh achat ka'olam malay. One life is like a universe. And because we value the individuals, Jews are a nation of outstanding individuals. We never merge in a crowd. We say, the Lord is my shepherd. But no Jew was ever a sheep. We all do our thing differently. And because of that, I don't know, we just produce greatness every direction you look. Here on the West Coast, Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg are Jewish. Sergey Brin of Google is Jewish. Sam Mendes, have you seen his film? Because it's going to win all the Oscars, I think. 1917 is Jewish. Daniel Radcliffe, who was Harry Potter, is Jewish. The one that my grandchildren tell me is the heartthrob of the moment, Timothy Chalamet is Jewish. Your most successful pop record producer, Mark Ronson, is Jewish. I'm sure the Almighty created Gentiles, but somehow or other, you don't hear about them that often, So now, how is it that this tiny, tiny people produces these extreme talents? They're not all of them very Jewish, but somehow or other, he planted in us the idea that every one of us counts. And in an age of mass viral videos and crowds, we stand out for the value of the individual. And that too is a great gift to our children and grandchildren. And one of the things that all these new technologies are actually reconfiguring the brain and making it very hard to concentrate for a long time. I do a program for the BBC and their news program called Thought for the Day, which used to be 3 minutes long and 15 years ago was cut down to 2 minutes 45 seconds on the grounds that nobody can concentrate for 3 minutes anymore. I think it must be down to 15 seconds now. Twitter is certainly down to that. And you think of the Daf Yomi, the Siyum Hashas that's just taken place, where you are studying one text for 7.5 years. There's nothing like it in world civilization. The cure for ADHD, this is the Jewish commitment to studying and learning and letting us be lifted by the text. So I really think that, and I also think that Judaism today is so important in a world of change because living Judaism does extraordinary things for us. It strengthens family. It strengthens community. It gives us an identity. It gives us a sense of global connectedness. It gives us a commitment to helping others. It develops the mind, the heart, and the soul. And in an age of climate change, of global instability, of uncertain impact of AI, of fragmented societies, deep divisions, no people, no faith has handled uncertainty longer and more successfully than we have. So I think Judaism is the gift for the future, not just of the past. And, I was so struck, I think I write it in one of my books. Your rabbi really knows my books better than I do, so I'll ask you where it appears. But there was a great English literary scholar who was famous throughout Britain called A.L. Rouse, fellow of All Souls College, Oxford. And the last book he wrote, just before he died, was called Historians I Have Known. And the penultimate sentence of that book is, if there is any honor in all the world that I should like, it would be to be an honorary Jewish citizen. Now, he never lived long enough for me to find out why he wrote that sentence. But that was the last but one sentence he wrote in his life. And I find that very moving. So we have to communicate this to our kids because they are leaving, if they leave our faith, they will not find something better outside. And we have to do it as compellingly as we can, which is why, as you probably, some of you will know, we've tried to use the new media to speak to young people through YouTube, through Facebook, through Instagram, through Spotify. I haven't got a clue what those things are. But it seems to touch young people, and that is how we have to do it. We have to take that eternal message and make it live again through the new media. That is Jewish identity. And finally, Israel. I don't know how this difference of opinion, there's a conference taking place now or soon in Beit HaNasi, hosted by President Reuven Rivlin, with leaders of the American Jewish community to try and heal the rifts between American Jewry and Israel. Now, how those rifts happen, I really don't know, except that I do. The answer is politics. But since when was our connection to Israel political? Israel is our home. It is the place to which we have been traveling since the days of Avram Avinu and Moshe Rabbeinu. Its language is ours, its landscape is ours, its calendar is ours. You can stand in Jerusalem and know that here in Yerushalayim, over there is where Avram and Yitzchak walked when they traveled towards the binding. It was here that David HaMelech made its capital. It's here that Shlomo HaMelech made the temple. Here that Jeremiah prophesied. Here that Ezra and Nehemiah gathered the exiles. Here that Rabbi Akiva looked down from Har HaTzofim on the ruins. It is here that Yehuda Halevi traveled. It is here that Ramban rebuilt the old Yeshuv. And if we in the diaspora don't like Israeli politics, most Israelis don't like Israeli politics. From this you don't die, So if you don't like some rabbinical decisions in Israel, not every Israeli does. But the truth is, I'm sure that some Americans don't like some American politicians. But does that mean you don't like America? You love America. To me, Israel is the miracle of miracles. No people has ever survived a 2,000-year exile and returned and rebuilt its land. No people has ever taken a language that for 2,000 years had not been the language of everyday speech and made it speak again. No people has ever survived a tragedy like the Holocaust and defiantly said, Lo amut ki echya, I will not die, but I will live and I will testify to the living God. No people has ever been scattered across the globe and then been ingathered and reunited, exactly as Moshe Rabbeinu foresaw. If you are scattered to the very ends of earth and heaven, from there, says God, I will gather you and bring you back. Israel is a miracle of biblical proportions. And even if it doesn't make you believe in God, at least let it make you believe in the people of God. If Moses Hess, if Moses Montefiore, if Theodor Herzl could see Israel today, they would not believe it. It is an amazing, amazing country. Sorry. Here is one of the oldest peoples in the world, and it is at the cutting edge of some of the newest technology in the world. Medical technology, information technology, nanotechnology. And sometimes the old and the new come together in unexpected ways. 2 years ago, a group of Haredi Dayanim asked, could they come and see me? I mean, fine, I didn't know what they wanted from me. So they come and see me with their kapotas and their gartelach. And I'm thinking, what are they going to talk about? And you wouldn't believe this. They told me they are writing the ethics code for autonomous self-driving vehicles. Now, can you imagine this? You know the problems that the ethic codes of autonomous vehicles are. You see, it suddenly starts raining and the car starts skidding and there are two cyclists in front of you and one is wearing a crash helmet and one is not wearing a crash helmet. Who do you crash into? If you crash into the one with the crash helmet on the grounds that he may survive, then you're penalizing him. I mean, if you crash into the one without a helmet, you're endangering his life. But if you crash into the one wearing a helmet, you're penalizing him for keeping the law. So what do you do in a situation like this? Well, I tell you, not even Stanford tells you how to answer that question, but you spend your lifetime learning Gemara, then on the one hand, on the other. It's easy. So somehow or other, Israel brings together the oldest of the old and the newest of the new. This is a completely true story, and it is a place where miracles happen daily. But what is really remarkable about Israel, and really important about Israel, is the way it represents in a part of the world obsessed with killing and with death, the biblical command, uvacharta v'chaim, choose life. Jews, when they came to Israel, systematically chose life in ways that are almost unbelievable. They came to a land that was desolate, that had been neglected for centuries, so they became the most innovative farmers in the world. They're surrounded by enemies, they become the greatest soldiers in the world. They have to cope with suicide bombers, they develop the most effective anti-terrorist measures that anyone has ever taken. They are faced with missiles, they invent Iron Dome. They have faced with tunnels, they have just developed ultra-sensitive listening devices that they are, as we speak, installing on the Lebanese border. Every single thing they do is uvacharta v'chaim. And do you know what is really impressive about Israel? There is a statement that we read in Shul this Shabbat about Pharaoh afflicting the people. And listen to what the Torah says. Kasher ya'anu oto ken yirbeh v'chen yifrutz. The more they were afflicted, the stronger they became. And that is what Israel proves to the world. The more afflicted Israel is, the stronger it becomes, and it is a role model to all humanity of what it is to choose life. The truth is that if a Jew today cannot stand proud of Israel, what can you stand proud of? Zu atzenu, zu amenu. This is our land, this is our people, and the greatest privilege of our time is that we have seen it. The greatest prophets saw it in a vision, we have seen it with our own eyes. And I have to say that this is the privilege of being alive at this time. So to summarize, number one, we can defeat anti-Semitism if we have friends, if we have security, and if we have self-confidence. Number two, we can inspire our children to be Jewish and to respect Judaism if we realize that it represents not just a great past, but also an extraordinarily powerful future. Number three, we have to stop playing politics with Israel. Israel represents our people at their very best, and it deserves our support, our love, and our devotion. So, because Israel really is where Judaism comes alive, because it represents a victory of life over death, of security over terror, of freedom over oppression, democracy over tyranny, and hope over despair. So I end with a story which is a very old story, so your rabbi knows it by heart and probably already told it to you, but I don't mind, okay? You'll hear it from me with two witnesses. It's proof that it's true. But this happened 45 years ago, that Elaine and I, you may have noticed that the British weather is not exactly the same as Los Angeles weather. It's cold, it's damp, it's miserable, and we love it. But comes winter, when it's really cold, damp, and miserable, it can get very depressing. And so for the first time in our lives, I said to Elaine, let's go and get some winter sun. We'll go to Eilat. Now, Eilat was very undeveloped in those days. People in my shul said, Rabbi, don't go to Eilat. Their standards of dress are not necessarily rabbonish. But we went anyway, and you know what? They were right. So I spent a week without my glasses on. Bumping into trees and lampposts and things. And I said to Elaine, what can we do that's vaguely rabbonish, And finally we came across these glass-bottom boats that you go on and you see all the lovely fish. I don't know if they're there anymore. This was a very long time ago, way before Eilat was built up as it is now. And we went on the boat, and we were the only people on the boat. And we were talking to each other, and the captain heard us speaking English and came up very excitedly and said, Ateme Anglia. And we said, yeah. Why do you ask? He said, well, I was just on a holiday in England. And so I said, did you like it? He said, wonderful. The buildings, so old. The grass, so green. The people, so polite. And then he looked around him, and the lot was then, just barren, brown desert and hills. And he looked at this barren landscape and opened his arms wide, and he said, Aval zeh shelanu. But this is ours. Friends, there are other nations, other faiths, and other countries, but this is ours. It's Hashem's great gift to us. Let us keep it, be proud of it, and hand it on to the next generation. Amen.